What is perfectionism and how does it show up? So what's the kind of feeling in the room? Is there an experience of perfectionism? Does it mean anything? Very often, those of us who are involved in supporting, leading, serving others, we want to do it 100%. Remember, we talked about the origins of the word burnout was the early volunteers, fully committed, highly skilled, burning out, because they really did want to save the world. Dee Hennessy, as a young woman, really did want to save the world. So perfectionism is a tendency to want to do too much, to want to be perfect. And sometimes it comes from that place of service or that place of desire to make things different. But we also now know from research that as my stress levels go up, my addiction, as somebody called it, or my tendency to perfection also goes up. What can happen if I have that tendency to perfectionism? I like to do it perfect or not at all. When I was in my garret developing Blossom, and I discovered there was 20,000 blossoms popping up around the world. Haha, I wanted to do Blossom. Blossom is, I thought that was my baby. As the stress levels come up, that tendency to perfectionism gets sharper. And guess what the outcome of that is? How does perfectionism trip you up? I procrastinate and I end up not doing anything. I can say that. Geraldine, is tied in with how I want to be perceived in the workplace. Yeah, it's kind of a self-propelling prophecy, isn't it? Again, I can identify with that as a younger woman. Dee can do it. Oh, I can do it. Oh, I take it on. I don't mind. Yes, of course. More. And the more I commit to, the more that's my image. And then the more people expect of me. And then the balls can't be kept up in the air and the balls begin to fall. Does that make sense? But actually, there is that correlation point. The more stressed I am, the more I tend towards perfectionism, the more likely it's going to end up in procrastination, and I end up doing nothing. I have that to-do list somebody mentioned the other day, and the to-do list haunts me because I'm such a perfectionist that I can't actually progress. So it's familiar enough territory. And thank you so much, guys. There's great sharing going on in the chat describing it, because each of us experiences, somewhat differently. But we are experiencing something, the tendency to perfectionism. Yeah, perfectionism means I'm going to do something perfect. As humans, we're not perfect. This is our issue. Okay. So I just wanted, and perfectionism is a thorny issue. It disturbs us. I know I have a tendency to perfectionism, and I've learned to soften it, and I'm learning to soften it. And that's what I want to invite into this space. So in the workbook, if you have the workbook, I think it's exercise 4. There's a peculiar little thing there, a tiny phrase. How very human of me. I learned this from a coach in New York a few years ago. She learned it from another coach. And it's been practiced quite widely now. And it sounds really stupid, doesn't it? Each time I make a boo-boo, I say something stupid. I come into this room unprepared. I make a mistake. Or I promise to deliver a report today and it's not done and it won't be done tomorrow. Each time something like that happens, I say, how very human of me. How very human of me. And just by saying those words, I'm already softening towards myself. Even if I don't believe it, even if I think it's stupid, the very saying of those words softens the edges of that harsh inner critic that comes out when it turns out that Dee Hennessy is not, after all, perfect. So I say something stupid. I don't get the job done. Instead of succumbing to the harsh inner critic, allowing myself to be crippled by my perfectionist tendency, I practice a phrase, a really simple phrase. How very human of me. So sometimes when I'm working with somebody who's really upset because they're not performing and because they're crippling themselves really with tiredness as they try to be perfect, I offer that simple phrase as the homework. And I say, can you write it on a yellow post-it? Can you stick it on your computer or your fridge? One lady wrote it on her hand in here, in her arm. How very human of me. I wonder how you hear that. Is it something that you might try? When you make a mistake, there's a boo-boo. You offer yourself, how very human of me. What do you think, guys? It's an evidence-based, tiny micro step. How very human of me. And it has an effect really by the sound of the words, by the brain getting the message, which then sends back soothing messages. How very human of me. So there's a place in the workbook where I invite you to really identify how you might use that phrase. How might you remember to use the phrase? And how might you anchor it into, your experience of maybe a tendency towards perfectionism, maybe that tendency getting a little out of balance as stress grows. Geraldine, for me, it is easy when I take away the E, when I take the E away from being humane, as I believe I am humane. Now I can be human. Yeah. Really what I'm saying is, part of being human, we know from all the wisdom traditions is, yeah, I am imperfect. I do make mistakes. I am human. I let down and I get let down. I suffer and I get sick. And I let balls drop. And I get tired. I'm human. Beautiful. So yeah, so it's a tiny practice, and some people respond to it as, what, Dee Hennessy, that's really silly practice, but it's also enormously effective. And I'll tell you one way that it's effective is if I have that tendency, and I do, to perfectionism, I get stressed, I get tired, and then I make mistakes. And then my inner critic gets really active. So I'm not only feeling tired, feeling not my best, but now I have this harsh inner voice also giving me what for. Now, is that just Dee Hennessy in the room, or does anybody else relate to that? Does the inner critic have any currency in this room? Just D. Hennessy, huh? Yeah. So we don't really have time to explore the inner critic, which is a fascinating part of ourselves that always lives with us and that always starts from a place of wanting to keep us safe. But in adulthood, as we get stressed, as we become unbalanced through an over focus on perfectionism, the inner critic can really come out to play. So this little phrase kind of softens the inner critic, because the minute I say how very human of me, even if I don't believe the words or feel the words, it's dampening down that harsh inner voice. It's quieting it down. And it's allowing me to feel a little bit of compassion for myself. How very human of me. You give yourself some self-care through soothing talk in the morning. Yeah. So when we're at baseline, we can invest in ourselves like that. And it's the tendency to perfectionism catches us off guard when we are stressed. And then that can unleash the inner critic. And then we start this vicious cycle. So one way, when I catch myself in that moment, having made a mistake, having let somebody down, having done something stupid, I say to myself, how very human of me. And that quietens down that harsh inner critic voice. So that's the offering or the practice for today. How very human of me. When I catch myself really feeling caught in a frenzy of realizing I'm not perfect, and then the inner critic giving me what for that.